there folks, Mr. G here with another educational video. This time we're going to continue from our last video where we talked about sampling and how to do a good sample, and talk about a few other things that affect how you sample and some of the answers that you get when you collect data from people. Last time we talked about sampling bias, how the people that you choose can affect the results that you get. So you want to make sure you're doing a random sample or a census so that your data is accurate and good. The next thing to think about when you're doing samples for statistics is how you phrase the questions that you ask. Look at the two similar questions we have down here. The first one, do you think Vancouver buses are amazing? The second, how do you feel about Vancouver buses? The first question here is probably going to bias people to say no. Unless the buses in Vancouver are really incredible, which, let's be honest, they're not. They're fine, they're good, but are they amazing? Maybe fewer people would think that. So if you use this question on your survey and you got a lot of no's, you might think, oh, Vancouver buses must be terrible, when in fact it's really saying that they aren't amazing. A better question would be, how do you feel about Vancouver buses? Because this allows you to see all of the different opinions and get a better sense of how people really feel if that's what you're looking for. Another thing to think about when you're collecting data is the ethics as well as privacy of the data you collect. For example, you might have data leaks, like what happened with Facebook, where a lot of personal information was taken from their users. You might also have some uninformed collection, so some of the apps that you might be using, depending on the privacy settings, may be sending data that you don't want to send to someone else. And this is really important to think about when you look at data that's presented to you or data you collect, is where it came from and if the collection was done in an ethical way. Another thing to think about is participant privacy, and in particular when you look at the answers that they give to your survey. If your participants don't think that their information is private, they might give you different answers. This is one reason why it's really hard to collect data about illegal activity. So if you wanted to know the number of people that have committed some type of crime, it's very hard to do that because your participants are probably not going to tell you about that if they think that you're going to leak that information. So it's important to think about what sort of information that participants might not tell you depending on whether they think it's private or not. So keeping the data that you collect private and telling your participants that is very, very important. Another consideration is the cost. A lot of times this comes down to whether you want to do a census or a sample. When the Canadian government does a census, they only do it every 5 years because it is so expensive and takes so much time. The other thing to think about is how large a sample you can take. If you only have a certain number of employees collecting data or a certain amount of money to run your study, you might only be able to take a smaller sample. If you have more money, you can take a larger sample and you'll get better results. Another thing where this comes up a lot is in product safety. If you think about, say, a car manufacturer, if they want to test their cars to see if they're safe, they need to check a certain number of them. Now, they probably can't check all of them because a lot of times car safety tests involve destroying the car. So they need to think about how large of a sample they have, how many cars they can afford to destroy to do the safety tests. All of this is really important to consider when doing a sample. Another consideration is time and timing. If you have a 2-minute survey or a 10-minute survey, it will really affect who's going to answer your survey, as well as the types of answers they're going to give. If it's a really short survey, they might do it quickly and not really pay attention. If it's too long, they might lose focus. It really depends on how long it takes, and this can really affect the answers you'll get, as well as who will actually take part in your survey. When you ask your questions is also really important. For instance, if you ask a question about how often someone exercises, whether it's summer or winter will really affect their answer. Maybe people are more likely to do exercise during the summer because it's nice and less likely during winter time. Lastly, there are a lot of cultural factors that go into any sort of survey or data collection. Depending on the type of people, certain topics might be sensitive. And going back to what we said about privacy, certain people might not be inclined to answer your questions depending on what their privacy concerns are. Phrasing is also really important when it comes to questions in order to be inclusive of everyone in a certain population. If, for instance, you wanted to include a question on your survey about gender, it would be important to include all different genders that people might answer, or to allow free-form answers that people just write as opposed to maybe binary answers to this question. That's the end of the second video here. Make sure you take a look at the homework as well as the weekly assignment, and I'll see you in the next video.